Guys, welcome to the I Love CVille Show. It's Jerry Miller. It's great to be with you on a gorgeous, crisp Thursday across Charlottesville, Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, and the world. We're live on the I Love CVille network. We have Jim Hingeley in the house, running for Albemarle Commonwealth's attorney. We will spotlight this gentleman, this scholar, this hombre on the I Love CVille Show, introduce you to what he is all about, what he stands for, what his beliefs, his tenets, his platform, and everything that makes him tick on today's program. Can you tell it's election season? Yesterday, Sally Hudson. I think on Tuesday, Elliot Harding. Next week, we have Kathy Galvin in a debate with Scott Beyer about zoning and affordable housing and ADUs. I love local politics right here at the I Love CVille Network. Jim's going to join us in a matter of moments. Before we get to Jim, let's thank some of the fine folks that make the program possible. We will give some love to Interstate Pest and Service Companies, one of our favorite clients. We're an advertising agency at V&V Brands. We've worked alongside this business for about 8 years. The company started, get this guys, in 1969 with the first generation, Mr. Robert Wells. And in 1969, Mr. Wells said, you know what? I'm going to start a company. I'm going to use my personal truck, and I'm going to use pay phones across Charlottesville to build this business. He went to his first customer, serviced them successfully, would find the closest pay phone and say, can I go to your home now? Today, Interstate Pest and Service Companies, a 4-generation strong family business, almost 100 employees in a business footprint that is now Commonwealth-wide. Interstate, we love you, baby. We also love the good doctor, Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine. Whether it's physical therapy, sports medicine, or chiropractic care, Dr. Wagner is changing people's lives. Now, I'll tell you what, I have the easy job. All I have to do is sit in this chair and be myself and do this show. The gentleman on the other side of this table, Judah Wickower, has the hard job. He keeps us on track. Judah, my friend, let's go to the studio camera, and let's welcome Jim to the show. Jim, how are you? What's going on?
Well, it's as you said, it's a beautiful day. I'm glad to be here.
I love it. I'm glad that you're here as well. I'm excited to spotlight you. Before we get to the campaign and platform, I want to find out what makes you tick. Who is Jim? Passions, hobbies, and interests. Tell us about yourself.
Well, there's a lot. And so, maybe just to give a little bit of the background. I was born in Baltimore. And Baltimore's been in the news lately as some people think it's a pretty bad place, but I love Baltimore. Baltimore's a great city. So I was born there. I grew up in Maryland and went away to college. And after college, I had some experiences that brought me into Central Virginia ultimately, and that's where I've been for a long while. So as soon as I finished college, I was recruited to work in a program with teachers. They have a program now called Teach America. They didn't have it back then. This was 1969. But the VISTA program existed then. It's called Volunteers in Service to America. And so they were interested in getting young people to come and teach in rural, isolated communities in what we called then Appalachia. These were places that were struggling.
Sure.
And so I was able to get a job and be a teacher for 2 years. So in terms of how that fits in with my life story, one thing about that is it right after college, it gave me a real opportunity to learn about public service, and I really have committed my life to public service. So that was the beginning of that. It also let me experience a different part of our country and learn about people's struggles and challenges and the things that were facing them in their everyday lives that were very difficult. And so that also had an effect on me as I moved ahead in my life, to be conscious of and concerned about people who were struggling in life, and to try to do what I could to help them. So it was a great experience, and it was just for 2 years. And it's kind of like they called it back then the domestic Peace Corps. You do a tour of duty of 2 years. So
sure.
I did that for 2 years, and really got a lot out of that, as I say, in terms of public service and in terms of understanding the struggles and problems that people face in life.
Gave you perspective.
It did. It certainly did. But I did one interesting thing while I was there because, as I say, it was a rural, isolated community. And there wasn't much going on there. And so I thought, well, I'll try to make the most of it. And I was a teacher in a public high school. And by the way, I taught the things that I love. I taught civics. I taught American history. I taught problems of democracy. So all the things that I'm doing now as a lawyer and what I'd like to do if I'm elected as Commonwealth's attorney kind of have some roots in the subject matter that I was teaching back in those days. But so I tried to use the time I had constructively, and they had a vocational school. And so I went to vocational school at night while I was teaching during the day. And while I was in vocational school, I became a welder. And it's welding is a pretty tough job. I mean, there's a lot to it. And that was a great experience to learn a trade, to learn a vocation and to master it. A lot goes into that. And again, that gives me perspective and an appreciation for people who work in vocations like welding. So once I did that, I thought, well, if I'm really going to learn how to do this, I better see if I can do it. And so I did. And I moved to Albemarle County in 1971.
1971. I love that.
And I lived out across the street from Stone Robinson Elementary School.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I worked in a number of factory and construction jobs.
Look at you.
Yeah, in Albemarle County and the surrounding area. And as a welder, and I worked for 2 years doing that.
It's not every day a welder decides, you know what, I'm going to become an attorney.
Well,
I love I love the fact that you are a welder. And you know why I love the fact that you were super smart to bring this up. You know why? Because it makes you, it shows that you have a different perspective, that you've seen different sides of earning money.
Yes.
It really humanizes your brand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Huh?
It's not every day that a welder chooses to run and to become an attorney either. Talk to us about that transition. When you're sitting on the welding line with your buddies and you know what? I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to go to UVA law school and I'm going to do this and stop welding. I'm sure they were like, what the hell are you doing, Jim?
You're right. It was a bit of a surprise. And of course, I always had law school in the back of my mind as an ambition, and being a lawyer as an ambition. So it wasn't completely...
Was it a money thing?
No.
To go to law school? And that's why you started as a welder?
You mean, did I need money to pay for going to law school?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought you were asking the question, was it a money thing to be a lawyer? And for a lot of people that is, but for me that was, public service was my interest in law, not making a lot of money.
You had to figure out how to pay for the tuition.
Yes, yes. But yeah, I saved up money being a welder. But to your point about the people I worked with, they were surprised, and understandably so, because it's not a typical career path. But they were delighted and happy for me because it was something I wanted to do, and that's the kind of relationship you have with the people that you work with. And interestingly, when I became a lawyer, I saw some of those people in my practice because I started out in private practice. I'll tell you how I ended up as a public defender later on, but I started out in private practice, and I did have some of the people that had been my work colleagues as a welder come to me as a lawyer. So there was a kind of a transition or a tie there.
I love it. One of the hardest questions I'm going to ask you. Are you ready? You grew up in Baltimore.
Yes.
Are you an O's fan?
I am.
Cal Ripken?
Yes.
Yeah?
And when I grew up in Baltimore, they were not in Camden Yards.
Right?
Right.
Right.
They were on 33rd Street in the old stadium.
Now, when they went to Camden Yards, I mean, one of the most beautiful ballparks ever. I've been to
Yes.
Camden Yards many times. Huge Cal Ripken fan. Huge fan of his consistency, his longevity, his teamwork, his mindset of like, I have to show up to work every single day. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like a job, 60, 70% of a job showing up to work on time, getting to the job. Because you can't do your job if you don't get there. Talk to us about the transition from a Baltimore boy being a welder, to choosing to go to UVA Law School, one of the best in the country.
Well, that's a pretty easy story to tell. When I came here, as I say, in 1971, and I worked for 2 years as a welder, I fell in love with this community. I fell in love with Albemarle County. And I didn't want to leave. And of course, I was very fortunate that UVA accepted me, and so I could stay here. I think if I had gone somewhere else, I probably would have come back, but it was nice to be able to stay here. So I did that. That's why I chose UVA. Of course, UVA is a good law school to go to.
It's a great law school.
Yeah, but it was a way for me to stay in this community.
Jim, we have a lot of comments coming in. I just got a DM for you. We're going to get to everything, guys. Give it a like, give it a share on any of the streams that you're watching. Elliot Harding watching right now. Bellamy Brown watching right now. Jessica Russo from the Nest team watching right now. Ray Cadell just shared the post. You have City Hall watching the program. CVille Weekly, NBC 29, and the Daily Progress have reporters that I see on the feed as we speak. You have a lot of attention on the show and on your campaign. We're getting close to the 5th. Getting close to showtime and close to the finish line here.
Okay.
When you arrived in Charlottesville in Albemarle County in 1971, Albemarle County in 1971.
Yes, Albemarle County.
What was it about this community that hooked you? I got here in 2000, and within 6 months, I'm like, this is going to be my home. Okay, huge sports fan. My first job out of the University of Virginia was as a staff writer for the Daily Progress in the sports section under Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe. Okay, I love the food.
Yeah.
I love the restaurants. I love the downtown mall. I love the beautiful women. I loved everything about this community and knew right away that this was going to be my home. What was it for you that got its hooks into you?
Well, Albemarle County was a different place in 1971. No downtown,
put it in perspective.
Yes, no downtown mall. The restaurant scene was much different from what it is now. And so the picture that you would have coming in 2000 is really different from practically 30 years before that.
Sure.
The edge of town was the edge of town.
Was it Barracks Road?
Well, a little bit past. You know where Hydraulic Road is, and the Kmart they've closed, but the Kmart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was. I mean, there was stuff out beyond that, but it was kind of rural after you got past the Kmart. And on the corner there, where Kroger's was the Ridge Drive-In.
Sure. So when you got here, that was right before Dr. Charles Hurt and Wendell Wood got to town, or they were in town, but before they really started developing 29. Dr. Hurt told me one time, you cannot enter or exit Albemarle County without seeing a Dr. Charles Hurt property.
Yes, and I do remember seeing the signs because they were all over the place then. But the development that's out there on 29 now just wasn't there. And so the area had charms. They were different sort of charm. But I liked the fact that there was a kind of a divide. There was the city, and then there was the rural part of the county. And so you had amenities in the city, and you had the beauty of the county, the landscape, the rural farming, the whole thing. So it kind of was a nice balance. And then, of course, throwing in on top of all of that was the University of Virginia, because the University of Virginia brings a lot to a community, especially what was then a much smaller community. So the University of Virginia had cultural opportunities, educational opportunities. You know, people would visit. You'd have speakers. You'd have all sorts of interesting activities that were tied into UVA. So it was kind of the three parts, really: the university, the county, which had a much more of a rural character then, and then the city and the downtown area.
So when you got here in 1971, were you a bachelor?
No, I was married.
You were married?
Yes.
Okay, so you and your wife moved to Albemarle County in 1971.
Yes.
I would love to hear the love story, how you guys met. Did you charm her? You had the good looks going then, right? How'd you guys meet?
Well, we met in college.
Okay.
I was in college, and she was working in an office where I worked.
Okay.
And so we met there. And it was the news office. And this is kind of old-fashioned stuff. Back then, news came to people through the newspapers.
Sure.
Mostly. I mean, they had some TV and they had some radio, but newspapers were the big source of media, really.
Yeah.
And so this was Harvard College, and I worked as a student because, helping pay the bills, right? And I worked in the news office, and my job, which was a terrific job, I can't believe it. I think you said one time maybe you love your work so much you might even do it without being paid.
I don't know if I said that. I actually did say that, but I don't. That's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
Anyone that's watching this show, it's $1.95 an hour. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, but this is a job that I would have done without, expecting to be paid. But I had to be paid because I had to pay the bills. Help pay the bills going to college. So. So it was reading newspapers. Every day for 2 hours, I walked into the office and they threw down a stack of newspapers on my desk, and I just read them. And I read them because they wanted to know what was in the news about the institution.
Of course.
And so that was where I met her, because she worked in the office too.
And did you know right away?
Oh, geez. I have to say it took a while.
Yeah?
Yeah. It was not love at first sight.
Okay.
But, yeah.
And she moves down with you, Albemarle County, in 1971. How did that conversation go?
Well, we had been in West Virginia, so it went very well. This was an opportunity for us to leave an area that was much more rural and isolated and come to an area where there are more things going on.
I love it. So talk to us a little bit about 1971. You get to Albemarle County. What are some of the things you guys were doing? I love to hear the history of the community. I love to hear how this fabulous, and for me, everyone's like, you're I Love CVille. I Love CVille, for us, is Central Virginia in totality. Because we know when Charlottesville's strong, the outer counties are strong. It's a trickle-over effect. So I look at Charlottesville and this metropolitan area that is Central Virginia almost as one. So I love to hear the history and the progression and the evolution and the maturation of the community. 1971, what are folks, you were roughly my age, what are folks doing then for fun?
Well, I think part of it was just enjoying the outdoors.
Nice.
There were a lot of things to do in the outdoors. There's boating and tubing and all of that. And there's hiking, beautiful hikes, Humpback Rocks.
One of my favorites.
The Appalachian Trail. There's just, riding bikes, doing walks, not hikes necessarily, but just walks in the local area. But kind of a lot of emphasis on doing outdoor activities.
I love it. You got questions coming in. Kevin Higgins, I will get to this question. Tim Ryan, I will get to your question. Grace, I will get to your question as well. 4-stage watching right now. Folks in Richmond, folks in D.C., folks across Charlottesville and the Commonwealth watching. All right, let's talk nitty gritty.
Okay.
Commonwealth's attorney.
Yes.
Big time position. Okay. You're running for it. Okay. Why Commonwealth's attorney at this point in your life?
Well, first of all, and I'm sure you understand this, I'm not a politician.
Right.
I've never run for office before. But I'm running for Commonwealth's attorney, and going back to what I said earlier about the way I've spent my life, because it's an opportunity for public service. I'm really committed to the community. I'm committed to public service. But why this particular type of public service?
Right.
That's the real question. And it goes back to the experiences that I've had as a lawyer. I have had 43 years of experience as a lawyer. I've done private practice in this community, and I've been a public defender in this community. Most recently, I started the public defender office for Albemarle County and Charlottesville, and I was the head of the office for 18 years.
Right.
Yeah, and the office is right across the street.
I know it well.
Yeah. Okay. So that really figures into why I'm running for this particular office. Another thing that I think figures into it is that I've taught part-time, of course, but I've taught at the University of Virginia Law School criminal law for 20 years. So when you put all that together, I know a lot about criminal justice.
Sure.
And it's not just knowing about the criminal justice system and what goes on in court, but it's also knowing the people who are involved in the criminal justice system. I sat down across from the people that we see in the court system day in and day out.
You've seen both sides.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I've learned about their lives. I've learned about how things go for them, and it's given me a perspective or an understanding of ways in which we could do things differently to change the course of criminal justice in our community. And of course, who better than the prosecutor to change the criminal justice system? The prosecutor has enormous power to make decisions every day that determine how cases are going to go through the system. And so I think with my perspective, my experience, my knowledge of the people in the community who are in the criminal justice system. And by the way, when I was representing defendants as a public defender, one part of my job in representing them effectively was to talk to people who were the victims. So I've really covered both sides. I know the defendants, and I know their stories and their situations, but I also know victims because I've sat down and talked to victims a lot, and I know what they're looking for in terms of wanting solutions, wanting to solve the problem of criminal behavior. So that's where the prosecutor, the Commonwealth's attorney, comes in. If I'm elected as Commonwealth's attorney, I can start making different decisions that will change the course of the criminal justice system for the better.
You'll appreciate this question. This
Okay.
is from Kevin Higgins. Kevin Higgins is a strong follower of this program. He says, Jim,
Yes.
what are some of the parts of the Commonwealth's attorney office and or community that you feel need to be welded together?
Well, here's a thought on that. We have, I think, a very good community when it comes to collaborating to improve the system. And I've done a lot of work along those lines. And so, for example, we have this program. It's called evidence-based decision-making. And what that is that we try to improve the criminal justice system, but we try ideas out that are based on evidence. This isn't like evidence in a criminal case. This is evidence or research that tells us that doing things a certain way could result in better outcomes. So going back to the question about welding, I think what we need to do is when we put together groups like the evidence-based decision-making group, we need to weld together all of the people in the community who can help us develop collectively a better approach to criminal justice, improve the system. So, for example, in evidence-based decision-making, we have the public defender, we have the Commonwealth's attorney, we have representatives from the police department, the sheriff's department, the magistrate, the judiciary, the probation and parole, community corrections, Region 10 mental health services. So for it to work, for progress to be made, it takes all the people working together. And it's hard
In unison,
work.
yeah.
Yes. And so maybe welding is a good metaphor for that.
A lot of questions coming in. This question is a topic that has been in the news. Just asked by JoJo Robertson, just asked by Chris Turner and Croze, on my list in my brain to ask you. Certainly something that's in the news cycle. What do you think about the current policy of notifying ICE of an undocumented inmate's release date? If you could change this, what would it be or what would you do?
All right. Well, let's lay the foundation for
Sure.
this discussion because it is a little complicated.
A legal immigrant gets arrested.
Yes.
This illegal immigrant goes to jail at, say, down Avon Extended.
Yes.
Should the jail, should police, should the county, should the municipality notify that this person is in the country illegally?
The answer, well, there's two parts to this. The first part is that the law requires that ICE get notified when somebody enters a jail who is in that situation. And so I support that law because it's the law. And there's just no question. I'm going to be a Commonwealth's attorney who follows the law.
The rule of the law.
Yes. So that's the law. But you see what that does? That gives ICE notification at the beginning when somebody comes into the jail. So the issue that has been in the news some is, should the jail also, as a secondary matter, notify ICE when somebody is ready to be released? So let's keep it clear that there are two different sorts of notice. One is legally required. I support that. The other is a secondary notice. The secondary notice is not legally required. It's a matter of jail policy. And so the jail policy is formulated by the jail board. And I might say the Commonwealth's attorney does not serve on the jail board. This is a decision for the community to make through its representatives who serve on the jail board. So, and you know the jail board here is comprised of representatives from Albemarle County, Charlottesville, and Nelson County. They all have a voice, they all have a vote. They decide. Now, certainly a Commonwealth's attorney can be asked about this and give advice about it or express opinions about it. Citizens can. And I did express an opinion about this as a citizen. So here's my view. ICE is a federal agency. They get notice up front as required by law, and nobody's disputing that. Then, to me, it's on them what they do with that notice. And if there's somebody of interest to ICE, they can go and get a judicially issued detainer warrant, send it to the jail, and the jail won't release them. They don't need to be notified of release. They just won't release them. But the way ICE operates is they don't want to do their job.
They want somebody else to do it for them.
They want us to do their
Of course,
job.
right.
And so I think that's wrong.
It's probably a resources thing.
Well, if it's a resources thing, my bet is ICE has a lot more resources than Albemarle County. And
Touche.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yes. And, you know, our jail staff is very hardworking, and they've got a lot of stuff to do to run the jail, and they do a great job running the jail. Do they need to have an extra burden put on them because ICE just can't manage it? I disagree. I don't think they should do that. I don't think the jail should be put in the position of having to do that work for ICE. So if I'm asked about it as Commonwealth's attorney, that would be my opinion. That was my opinion as a citizen. I spoke to the jail board when they had comment on this back in January of 2018, long before I thought of running for Commonwealth's attorney. And so I think, you know, I think it really comes down to a matter of the federal government operating in a way that I think, and I think we see this in other areas, but I think the federal government feels like they can just draft everybody else into doing some of their work for them because they're so important. And the job that ICE does is important, but I think they should keep it clear they should do their job and we should do our job. That is to say, the jail staff here in Albemarle County and Charlottesville and Nelson County should be allowed to do their work of running the jail and not have this additional burden.
Nice answer right there. Steve Henderson in Earlysville, I will get to your question here in a matter of moments. In your campaign, where does this particular topic of ICE and illegal immigrants rank in order of stuff that you're hearing from people from an important standpoint? Because it's certainly in the news cycle.
You know, I would say it's not at the top of the list.
Okay.
And I do hear about it some, but I think it's partly because my opponent I believe, or I've been told from some people who have heard his way of discussing this, is misrepresenting my position. And so when somebody's position is misrepresented, it does cause this to be more in the news, right? So my position, and where it gets confusing and where he's, I think, misrepresented where I stand, is he says I'm not in favor of ICE notification, and that the law requires ICE notification, and therefore I wouldn't follow the law. But that's not true. As I explained it to you, I fully support the law that exists, but the ICE notification that I object to is the one that's secondary and voluntary and done as a matter of policy, not a matter of law. So that's one of those things, if you don't look at it closely, you can easily be misled because I have the certain position that I do.
And I'm not going to take, it's not my role to take a side on this. It's my role to have a conversation.
Yeah.
From my standpoint, I would not want my Commonwealth's attorney to interpret or manipulate or change the rule of the law. I would want my Commonwealth's attorney to take the law as it is.
Yes.
And as the law as it is now, you notify upon arrest, you don't notify upon release. I think the manipulation, perhaps, maybe that's not the right word. Yeah, that's the right word. The manipulation by your opponent is used as potentially as a strategy to build momentum for his campaign. That's what I've seen from my perspective. Throw that to you.
Well, I agree. But just let me emphasize, and the way you put it is right. I think a prosecutor needs to be somebody who respects the rule of law.
Right.
And absolutely.
That's the whole point of the job.
Yeah, absolutely I respect the rule of law. And I've spent my life using the rule of law to fight for people. As a public defender, we don't have much ammunition. But the one thing that we have, the most important thing we have, is the rule of law and the Constitution. So I went to court every day as a public defender and said, you got to play by the rules. And for the benefit of my client, and I won some and lost some for sure, but I was in there fighting every day for the rule of law, and that's how I would be as a prosecutor.
For the benefit not only of your client, but the municipality in totality, from both the micro and macro level.
Of course, the community wants to have confidence in criminal justice system, and that confidence is built on the rule of law.
Because a community that has confidence is a community that's more apt to follow the rule of the law because they understand that it's not going to change based on a scenario.
Right. That's right.
A lot of stuff I want to throw to you. Yannick Foyle, welcome to the program. Chris Shiflett, thank you for joining us. Steve, I will get to your question here in a matter of moments. Criminal justice reform. Where does that stand? When you're shoe leather, boots on the streets, knocking on doors, meeting people, kissing hands, and shaking babies. Criminal justice reform, where does that stand on the pecking order of things you're hearing from potential voters?
That's the top of the list.
That's number one, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It should be.
And I get a lot of very positive response when I talk about criminal justice reform issues. And there's a lot of issues, but I do get...
Just got a DM for you on this
Okay.
direct message. I'll get to that in a matter of seconds here, but keep going. I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, I talk about mass incarceration. I talk about racial injustice. I talk about the death penalty. I talk about cash bail. I mean, there's a lot of facets to criminal justice reform, but I talk about my ideas, and then I also listen. The conversations at the front doors are two-way conversations, and I learn a lot from the community. And just to give you an example, I was talking one day about mass incarceration, and the woman I was talking to said, "You know, I'm a teacher," and of course I love teachers, right? and she said, "You know, I understand what you're saying about trying to keep people in the community, try to address criminal behavior in the community instead of sending people to jails and prisons." And she said, I have a kid in my class whose parent is incarcerated, and this kid is suffering, and of course any child is going to suffer when they're separated from their parent. But what the teacher told me about was that child beginning to have behavior problems that she identified as coming from that separation. And the behavior problems will lead to greater school discipline for that child, and ultimately will lead to that child becoming involved, possibly, we hope not, but I mean, it seems like this is the course that might be followed, lead to the child becoming involved in the criminal justice system. And so part of my goal in ending mass incarceration is to help the people themselves, the offenders, get their lives back on track, but also it'll have an impact on the family members that they've left behind if they were going to jail instead of doing it differently. And I see from that conversation that I had with that teacher at the door that that part of what we're doing is creating more problems in the future because of the impact of incarceration on the family members who are left behind. So that's the kind of thing that I get when I talk to people and listen to people.
I see the Friends of Robert Tracci Facebook page watching the stream right now.
Oh,
so
good.
your opponent, maybe not your opponent, but someone on his team is watching the program right now. Give it a like, give it a share on any of the streams that you guys are watching. A lot of questions coming in. We'll get to it. I'll get to this DM as well. Shannon Pollock-Neal, we will get to your question as well. Here's my problem with a lot of criminal justice system. It is not balanced. There's a tremendous disparity. Let's just take marijuana. I'm a libertarian, okay? I'm a small business owner. I am socially liberal, physically conservative. When it comes down to it, I don't want the government in my life. I don't want the government in my stuff. I would use another word, but we're, okay.
Gotcha.
Don't care who marries who. I don't. A woman should be able to do whatever she wants with her body. It's her body. Who am I to say what she's supposed to do with her body? Okay? When it comes down to it, I just don't want, as a small business owner, the government in my life to the extent that it is right now. Okay? And when I look at the world today, and I look at the county, the city, the Commonwealth, the country, I see someone that gets popped or arrested. Let's just take an ounce of marijuana. Okay?
All right.
And someone who gets arrested with an ounce of marijuana that is an African American, someone who gets arrested with an ounce of marijuana that might be a white person. It is so weighted unfairly, the system, against the African American and what's going to go against his or her, what's coming down the pipe for him or her, as opposed to a white person. The numbers speak for themselves.
Yes.
Okay, let's start there with that topic, and then I have a lot more where I need to go.
Well, there's two parts to that topic. There's the racial justice, and then there's the marijuana.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start with the marijuana.
Please.
As I said before, I support the rule of law. And so I'm not a person who, if I'm elected, will not prosecute marijuana. I will prosecute marijuana charges. I also will support decriminalization of marijuana. One thing about being the elected Commonwealth's attorney is
You have influence.
you do have influence. You can go to the legislature, and I've been to the legislature working on legislation in the past. So I know how that works, but I would be an advocate for decriminalization. But when marijuana is still illegal, it needs to be prosecuted. But here's the thing, and I think you touched on this when you were talking about what happens to people with marijuana charges. If you prosecute a marijuana case, as, for example, Mr. Tracci does, and you end up recommending and the court imposes a fine, then you feel, or he feels, it appears, that that's okay, that it's really not a big deal. You got a fine, you go on your way. But what he's missing is that it is a big deal, not because of the fine, but because of all the things that happen to you as a result of getting a marijuana conviction. And first of all, you lose your driver's license.
which has a devastating effect on any individual as they look to improve their quality of life. How do you get to and from a job, improve your work resume without a vehicle?
Right. It's very hard on people. Now, they say that you can get a restricted driver's license, and in some cases you can. So they take your license away but give it back to you partially. So let me say that in the interest of being, pretty clear on this. But one thing, and I had this case come up, you can't get a restricted license for a commercial driver's license, a CDL.
Right.
So you lose your license, and I had a guy who was employed with a local contractor, but his job was driving vehicles that required a CDL, and he got a marijuana conviction and he lost his job. And again, let me also say, we're talking about marijuana possession that's unrelated to driving. I'm not talking about driving.
Sure, under the influence of marijuana. Two different things.
Two different things.
Sure.
I'm just talking about somebody that gets caught
personal usage.
Personal use
Yeah.
outside of driving. So yes, losing your license can harm people a lot in terms of their employment, in terms of their daily living. So losing a license, but it goes beyond that. There are all sorts of other things that happen. For example, somebody who wants to go on to college, get an education, federal student aid, there are limitations on federal student aid for people who have marijuana convictions. Somebody, and a lot of this is focused on jobs and education because that's really important to people, is have the opportunity to have jobs, to get an education. So there's something where their ability to get an education could be prejudiced. There are a lot of regulated occupations where if you have a narcotics conviction, and marijuana counts as a narcotics conviction,
just crazy
that you can't enter a licensed occupation. There's some barriers to public housing. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And of course, you have to list the conviction as part of your record, and people who are potential employers can look at that how they may. So I think that the issue is not just that you get a fine, but that there are these other really very serious consequences that come from having a marijuana possession conviction that are being overlooked the way that the prosecution in Albemarle County is going now. And by the way, I tried a jury trial in Albemarle County, and you know how jury trials work. They bring a lot of people in to be jurors, and then you ask them questions whether they can be fair and unbiased, and then as you go through the questions, some people will drop out, and then you have enough left to do the jury.
Sure.
Well, this was a marijuana possession case that I was fighting all the way because of all the things that I just described to you. This was the case that ultimately the guy lost his CDL. And while we were questioning the jurors, so many of the jurors in Albemarle County said, we think that marijuana prosecutions are wrong, that we ended up not having enough jurors to try the case.
Good.
Yes. Well, I mean, you come back another day and you do it, but that was a way that...
That's a microcosm of the American public and how they feel about this issue.
But that helps to inform my perspective on marijuana prosecutions, because these were Albemarle County citizens.
Right.
These were jurors who came there, and believe me, their opinions were very strong. And they ran from, tenured professors at UVA, at the end of their career, to young folks in the community, just a big cross-section of the community. Well, anyhow, so I have a lot of ideas about prosecuting marijuana in a way to eliminate some of those harms.
Good.
And, they range from, first of all, looking at how the evidence was acquired, and if there's a doubt about how the evidence was acquired, whether it was constitutional or not, that gives a reason to ask the court to stop the prosecution. I also will look at lab testing. And, we do field tests now, although they've kind of been put on hold because of the new hemp law. It makes it a little hard to do field testing that's accurately distinguishes between legal hemp and illegal marijuana. But so lab testing has to be done at the forensic labs, and it's time-consuming and costly and wasteful. Our forensic scientists need to be doing important work, not checking on whether something is weed or not.
Thank you.
So
the opportunity cost of their time should not be spent on something like this.
Right. So in the cases where where it depends on a laboratory analysis, then I would be in a position to ask the court to let it go. And remember, when I'm talking about, in the case of the lawfulness of how the evidence was acquired, or the wasteful use of laboratory resources, my procedure would be to present the reason to the court, and the court would rule on it. So again, I'm operating within the rule of law. But there are ways to look at it differently, to ask the court to let it go, because that's the right thing to do. In the end, the way I would see marijuana prosecution, if the case isn't over, another thing I would do is I would certainly approve of first offender treatment, which results in a dismissal after you enter a first offender program. So lots of different ways to mitigate the harmful effects of marijuana conviction. But in the end, if it comes to court, then I would use my power legitimately and lawfully as a prosecutor to ask for the charge to be amended to a different charge under the drug section that wouldn't carry the harmful consequences of a marijuana conviction.
We are 48 minutes in and you're crushing it. We're going to run the gauntlet with you. We're going to pick up the tempo and the pace.
Okay.
We're going to fire questions at you.
Okay.
And in the final 12 minutes, we're going to get your perspective on an array of topics. Are you ready?
Ready.
Rick Randolph, Supervisor, Albemarle County, recently went on the record when the debate was whether or not to move the courts from downtown to the county, and leveraging the courts in the county to build an epicenter of activity, employment, whatever you call it, right?
Yes.
So many folks, attorneys, so many folks, DBAC, so many folks, affiliate police, wanted to keep the courts downtown because of the built-in efficiencies, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Here's where I'm going to go with this. Rick Randolph said on the record, I oppose this. And why I oppose this is because the city of Charlottesville has a long history of not keeping its promises with Albemarle County. And the city of Charlottesville is promising X amount of parking spaces, X amount of improvements to the court system to keep the courts downtown. And he essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing, I'll believe it when I see it, because the city has had a long history of not keeping its word with Albemarle County. My question is this: the relationship between the city of Charlottesville and Albemarle County. What can you do to improve it should you be elected? What needs to be done to facilitate and foster this relationship even more? Because the layman, me, the average citizen, me, most of the time doesn't even know whether he's driving in the county or driving in the city. It's this imaginary line that we have no idea what the hell is, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You, if elected, what can you do to foster that relationship?
Well, that's a pretty tough one, because I'm not sure that the Commonwealth's attorney has much of a role in that. First of all, let me say Rick Randolph has endorsed me. And let me say also that I disagreed with his
You heard it, right?
Absolutely, I heard it. It was no secret. And I think there were two parts to it, as you described it. One was the economic development piece, and the other was the distrust of the city.
Yeah.
But you also said what I said when I had a chance to speak out on this issue. The built-in efficiencies are just enormous, and we don't have time to go into them. But they're not just efficiencies for lawyers; they're efficiencies for
our most impoverished citizens.
Yes, and for agencies that help citizens, like the probation and parole, who can swing between the two court systems, like OAR, community corrections that can go back and forth, like legal aid.
Like public transportation.
Absolutely. So
we'll leave that alone.
That's not your question, so we won't debate that. But there's very strong reasons that the courts should be kept together. Now, in terms of Charlottesville and Albemarle, and the fact that we're all one community when you look at it, we don't know when we cross the boundary line. That is one thing about a prosecutor. that I think where I would have some effect. Because right now, the course of your treatment in the criminal justice system varies greatly depending on which side of the line you were arrested on. And so my policies and my proposals will align me much more closely with some of the policies and approaches that are carried out by the city prosecutor. And this isn't by the city. This isn't a Charlottesville versus Albemarle. This is a Charlottesville prosecutor versus an Albemarle prosecutor. So I think the community will find, if I'm elected, that the justice that's administered in these two separate communities is much more consistent.
That's a must.
Yes.
That is a no-brainer.
Well,
I live in Redfields in Albemarle County. I spend 70 hours a week in the city of Charlottesville.
right.
I know where the county city line is because I pass it every single day.
Yes.
But I want the rule of the law to be the same where I'm at in these two municipalities. And that's exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
I love it. All right, let's pick up the pace and tempo even more here. Let's talk about this question that's coming in from one of our viewers. This question is a good question. Jim, if you are elected, what factors would you consider to determine a capital punishment case, that a capital punishment case is warranted?
Well, of course I would follow the law as to whether a capital murder case would be charged. But that's not really what I think this question is getting at. The question is, I think, and let me make this the question, would I seek a death sentence?
That's the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so there is a distinction. I would seek a conviction on capital murder. I would not seek a death sentence, period. There aren't any factors that would justify seeking a death sentence. So Albemarle County hasn't had a death sentence in over 50 years. That death sentence was commuted. We know
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Over 50 years.
Over 50 years. So
more than 50 years.
More than 50 years.
Yeah.
So Albemarle County has shown that death sentences are not necessary to administer justice in this community. We know that the death penalty is administered in a racially prejudicial manner.
Big time.
So why would we want to do that? And also importantly, and there's so many reasons, but I'll just name one more because time is short. The death penalty is subject to being, the decisions about death penalties can be flawed. And so, for example, since 1973, there have been 167 people exonerated who got death sentences.
So you're basically saying you're going to die from the courts,
Yes.
and they should not have been.
And there are 167 people who are actually innocent. Actually innocent.
That's terrifying.
And if you do the numbers, during that period of time, that's 1 in every 10 cases of death sentences.
That's terrifying.
1 in 10. And we don't need that, and I'm not going to seek a death sentence. And it's not just in the country at large. This happened right here in this same judicial circuit in Culpeper, the Earl Washington case. And that was a case where he was sentenced to death and came within days of being executed, and he was later found to be actually innocent.
Another one that comes to mind, now he wasn't sentenced to death, was Robert Davis.
Yes, not sentenced to death, but there you go. Another mistake.
Another mistake.
And you know, you can't bring somebody back if you made a mistake if they were the wrong person to be executed.
Well said.
Okay?
Very well said. Give it a like, give it a share on any of the streams that you're watching. What separates you from your opponent?
Well, a lot. That's one reason, what we just talked about, one thing. But a big thing is experience. When he was elected in 2015, he hadn't even tried a criminal case on his own. So he had virtually no experience in the criminal courts. I've tried thousands of cases. I've handled, thousands of issues. I've dealt with thousands of people in the criminal justice system. So experience, it's a big difference. And experience counts. Just take a look at what happened in the Jason Kessler case. Here's a prosecutor with little to no experience bringing a perjury charge against Jason Kessler, who was one of the white nationalists that organized the rallies back in August of 2017. And he failed to prove where the crime occurred. It occurred in Albemarle County, but he failed to prove it and lost the case. And so that's an example of where being inexperienced and being ineffective as a chief prosecutor hurts the community.
As a citizen of the community, and I identify the community as Central Virginia.
Yes.
Okay, you're a citizen of Central Virginia. This is not a Commonwealth's attorney question. This is Jim the man question. August 12, 2017. I was right there in front of this building. I own the lion's share of this building. My son is 18 months old. He was in my wife's stomach at the time, right? Not born yet. I knew that my son, when he got to history class, would learn about August 12, 2017, when he got to history class. I wanted to be able to relay firsthand perspective from Dad. Your dad saw this play out firsthand. I was also concerned about the building, okay? So I'm sitting right there. I see violence like I've never seen before. Left me in a funk for 60 or 90 days. My wife helps me get out of this by saying, look, you're either going to go seek therapy or we're going to do something to get you out of this. The birth of this show was a result of that. As a citizen of Central Virginia, August 12, 2017, open-ended question. What went through your mind?
Well, our community was terrorized, no doubt about it. And what went through my mind after that was over is, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to move on from here? What changes are we going to make? And part of that happened on August 11th, as you know.
On the grounds of UVA.
On the grounds of UVA. And the part that happened on the grounds of UVA was in the county. And there are so many people in our community, students, faculty members, community citizens, members of the faith community who were there on August 11th, who were terrorized by torch-wielding terrorists. And there's a...
Stina McGill's husband was hit with a torch, sent to the hospital.
Right. And there were people who were not physically injured, but they were terrified. And those people, there's a law, a burning objects law, that says they can be prosecuted, but our prosecutor's not doing that. And so when I think about what happened in August of 2017 and what our community's response to that is, I see somebody who's not defending the community, and that really upsets me and disappoints me.
You will appreciate this. Asher, you will appreciate this as well. Kevin Higgins, good show, Jerry Miller. Because of today's show, I can make an educated vote for Commonwealth's attorney. That's from Kevin Higgins. Just put that on the feed right there. Giving you some props. It looks like you just earned somebody's vote.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to throw this question to you. I'm going to go a little bit longer with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. We're 60 minutes in. Enjoy our conversation. Affordable housing. Charlottesville's 10.27 square miles. Whether we're at capacity or not, its beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The yes in my backyard folks say, look at these parking lots that we can build apartments and go up in. The no in my backyards folks, the folks that are, let's keep it single family neighborhoods. Let's preserve the character of the neighborhood. Let's not build more density. Say Charlottesville's at capacity. We can't do any more housing. Lloyd Snook, whose office is right around the corner from here.
Yes.
A colleague of mine who's come on this show many times. He says if we're going to solve the affordable housing conundrum, we need to have Albemarle County get more involved. Because Albemarle County has the land, City of Charlottesville's at max capacity. What do we think, and this might not necessarily be in the wheelhouse of Commonwealth's attorney, but this is certainly in the wheelhouse of someone who spent 41 years in the community, and certainly in the wheelhouse of someone that, should he get elected, is going to have influence and be talking and rubbing shoulders with Board of Supervisors and planning commissioners. What do we look at Albemarle County, City of Charlottesville, and how we're going to solve this conundrum that's affordable housing?
Well, you're right. It's kind of out of my wheelhouse. That's a really big policy issue. And so I think I'll respond in a general way that going back to Rick Randolph's view of the level of trust that exists between the city and the county. And he felt that there was not enough trust to go forward with the courts project, keeping the courts downtown. I think that we do suffer in this community from distrust among the people, the jurisdictions, and that includes the University of Virginia as a separate entity, but UVA, Albemarle County, and Charlottesville. And I think the way toward a solution for affordable housing, a solution to other problems that we have in our larger community, is to build trust, work harder at building trust, and then I think solutions will come. But I think that the lack of trust, at least on the part of some people, this isn't 100%, but the lack of trust needs to be addressed, and it needs to be changed. And anything I can do to contribute to that as Commonwealth's attorney, I certainly would.
Dave Norris, welcome to the program. Former Charlottesville mayor watching right now. I see 3 entities in where I live. Charlottesville and Albemarle County. I work in Charlottesville, live in Albemarle County. Okay. I see Albemarle County. I see the City of Charlottesville. I see the University of Virginia. I'm terrified as a father. My son melts my heart in ways that... Do you have kids?
I have 3 kids and 4 grandchildren.
I have never experienced, until my son was born, the love that I have for this little boy. He can smile. I work 70 hours a week. I can come home, be on the weekend, and he can smile at me, and I just I melt. Right? I just melt.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm terrified as a father that we are turning into a community of white, rich people. I'm terrified we're heading down the road of being another San Francisco. Now, the businessman in me is look, this is going to be good for the business. Mm-hmm. But we're at the point where we're 11 years in and have traction, success, where we don't have to put that mindset first. As a social entrepreneur, it's about leaving the community in a better place than when I first arrived in 2000. Where I'm going with this is as someone of influence, should you get elected as Commonwealth's attorney, what can we do to foster diversity successfully in our community?
Well, again, as Commonwealth's attorney, I certainly have thought a lot about that issue, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I care about that issue. But specifically in terms of the Commonwealth's attorney's role in that,
I understand it's not X's and O's right in your wheelhouse here.
Yeah, but I think the thing I would say about the Commonwealth's attorney's office and the role of the Commonwealth's attorney on this issue is that when I talk about ending mass incarceration,
there you go.
The thing about ending mass incarceration is we have racial injustice.
That's why I threw you this question.
Yes, okay. And so a Commonwealth's attorney can help in the criminal justice system to achieve racial justice, to see that we're not locking up African Americans at a disproportionate rate.
There you go.
And so, yes, that is something specifically that a Commonwealth's attorney can do. And let me add, because I do have a specific policy that relates to racial justice. And that is, we currently have a study that's going on in the city and the county about disproportionate minority contact in the adult criminal justice system. And we don't have the results of that study yet. It'll be interesting to see. But what they do is they take a deep look at the data of how white, African American, Latino people in the system are treated and how they're treated differently, okay? But the data that they have are things like arrest data, jail booking data, and that sort of thing. So here's my idea as a prosecutor. Nobody knows what goes on in the prosecutor's office when it comes to decision making. And the prosecutor has enormous power to make decisions that affect people's lives. So what I want to do is I want to keep track. We do 100 plea agreements, just as an example, 100 plea agreements. But nobody knows, other than the people in the office who have good intentions and don't want to discriminate on a racial or other basis, right, that we feel like we're doing the right thing. But how do we know unless we actually keep the information, keep the data? So my proposal, and this has never been done, and certainly in the local offices.
Analyze and archive.
Analyze the data and present it publicly. It's not a secret, you know. Let's present it publicly so the public can judge. We have good intentions. We're not going into this to discriminate, but let's see if we can prove that our good intentions played out the way we expect them to.
That's called a POP in advertising, a proof of performance.
Okay, there you go. And if it's not, then I would have the information, the data on which to change policies to make sure that we do it. Yes.
I love it. You know why the Commonwealth's attorney, and I'm going to follow up on this, and then I'm going to ask you a final question. Why should Albemarle County vote for Jim? That's going to be the last question I'm going to ask you. I have a feeling you're going to hit a grand slam with that. Okay. You know why the Commonwealth's attorney has an impact on keeping the City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County and whatever municipality it may be? You're Albemarle County. Why the Commonwealth's attorney has influence in preventing Albemarle County from evolving into a bastion or a playground of white, wealthy people is what you just said. If you're able to adjust how court system prosecutes African Americans, Latinos, and whites and make it more equitable, then you are going to help build trust and breed trust with the African American and Latino community. Because if I knew the court system in my home, Albemarle County, was unfairly prosecuting African Americans, Latinos, compared to whites, if I was an African American person, why would I want to live there? Mm-hmm. I would move, I would get the hell out of Dodge.
Right.
You know, so you do have influence of creating and building and maintaining diversity in the municipality. Because the police and the court system are an integral part of the community. And right now, the numbers speak for themselves. It's such an unfair disparity of who's getting popped, prosecuted, going to jail, and spending time behind bars.
Right. And as I said, that's something that's very high on my list to work on.
Why should folks vote for you?
Well, experience. I have an awful lot of experience compared to my opponent. And experience is one thing, but it's what you do with that experience. It's the knowledge that I've gained through working in the system for so many years. It enables me to identify opportunities for doing things differently. And we do need a change to make a more racially just system, as I was saying, to make a system where we create people, we help people get back on track. And when they're back on track in the right way, by keeping them in the community, giving them substance abuse, mental illness treatment, then they are less likely to reoffend. So I'm interested in building a safe community. People that we throw away in jails and prisons, they are more likely to reoffend.
Yeah, they come back and they're hardened criminals.
Yeah, and so and again, I'm not talking about everybody. That's the point of my experience, my life here, is that I can identify the ones that would benefit from a different approach. And there's some people who are violent, dangerous criminals who need to be prosecuted, convicted, and removed from the community. My experience lets me do that. I can do that effectively. I'm not going to make rookie mistakes like my opponent makes. So those are the reasons that you should vote for me. Racial justice, a safer community, and let's end on a note that you touched on earlier as a property owner and taxpayer. Let's save the money that we're wasting on jails and prisons, and let the taxpayers use that money for more important things in our community.
Like economic stimulus.
Yes.
Creating jobs. You hit a home run today. Grand slam today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. We close the show the same way every time, and we'll get to that in a matter of moments. About the golden rule. We have a second show today on Thursday on the I Love CVille network, which is in an hour and 20 minutes. It's our charity focus show. We're turning this into a network, the I Love CVille show, Monday through Friday, 12:30 to 1:30, in Jim's case, 1:40, because he did so well. We also have a real estate show on Friday mornings. We have a animal focus show, because we love animals, on Wednesday, and a charity focus show on Thursday. Today's show, we spotlight Caring for Creatures, the first no-kill animal sanctuary in Central Virginia. A nonprofit that takes animals from up and down the eastern seaboard that are about to die and be euthanized, rescues them, and brings them to Fluvanna County for a second, third, and fourth shot at life. Dudes, if you don't see that as a nonprofit that needs to be celebrated, then you don't have a heart. I close the show the same way every time by asking everybody that's watching the show to embody the golden rule. I do not make this about religion. I'm not going to talk to you about religion. I make this strictly about treating men and women in your life like you want to be treated yourself. It's the golden rule. It seems like such a simple concept, doesn't it? Treat others how you want to be treated yourself. I think it's lost, however. Charlottesville needs it, the Commonwealth needs it, and we know the country needs the golden rule more than ever. My name is Jerry Miller. If you want to watch today's program in perpetuity, you can do so on ilovecville.com. We will take the audio, we'll turn it into an iTunes podcast. We will syndicate this show for 30 days. Interestingly, that times out quite well for you on November 5th. We will syndicate the show on 17 Facebook pages, 17 Twitter accounts, the third largest Instagram community in Central Virginia, a daily e-newsletter that reaches 108,000 inboxes, and of course, on ilovecville.com and on iTunes. My name is Jerry Miller. It's the I Love CVille Show. We'll see you now in an hour and 28 minutes on the Caring for Creatures Spotlight. Take care. You did so well.
Oh,
Was it fun?
thank you. Yes, I enjoyed it.
It flew by, right?
Oh, yeah.
1:42 right now. We'll take your photo real quick. J-Dubs is going to do that with us. We'll stand here.